When Derek Thompson called me worthless in front of the entire marketing team, I smiled and nodded. But what he didn't know was that his boss had been secretly negotiating $1 million deal with my consulting firm for the past 6 months. Some people think revenge is a dish best served cold. I learned it's actually best served with a side of irony and a presentation deck that changes everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Martinez, and for 3 years I worked as a marketing coordinator at Apex Digital Solutions in downtown Phoenix. The glass towers reflected the desert sun like mirrors, and from the 15th floor, you could see the mountains stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was the kind of view that made you believe anything was possible, which is ironic considering how small they tried to make me feel every single day. I took the job fresh out of college with a marketing degree and dreams bigger than the Arizona sky. The salary was decent for entry level, the company had a good reputation, and I thought I'd found my launching pad into a successful career. Derek Thompson was my immediate supervisor, a man in his early 40s who wore expensive suits and had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He had perfectly styled hair, a corner office, and a habit of speaking over people in meetings like their ideas were background noise. When I first started, Derek seemed professional enough. He shook my hand firmly during our initial meeting, walked me around the office introducing me to the team, and explained my responsibilities with what appeared to be genuine interest in my success. I was assigned to handle social media campaigns for smaller clients, create content calendars, and assist with market research. Simple tasks, but I approached them with enthusiasm and precision that surprised even myself. The work came naturally to me. While other coordinators struggled with analytics and campaign optimization, I found myself diving deep into data, discovering patterns that others missed, and developing strategies that consistently outperformed expectations. My campaigns showed engagement rates 30% higher than the department average. My content generated more leads than posts from coordinators who had been there for years. The clients I worked with specifically requested me for their projects, praising my creativity and attention to detail. But Derek never acknowledged any of it. When clients complimented my work, he'd thank them on behalf of his team without mentioning my name. When my campaigns exceeded targets, he'd present the results in team meetings as collective achievements. When I suggested new strategies during brainstorming sessions, he'd dismiss them as unrealistic, only to present similar ideas weeks later as his own insights. The pattern became clear after my first 6 months. Derek saw me as a threat, not an asset. I was young, hungry, and producing results that made his management style look outdated. Instead of mentoring me or finding ways to leverage my skills for the department's benefit, he began systematically undermining my confidence and contributions. He'd assign me to multiple projects with impossible deadlines, then criticize me for not dedicating enough attention to each one. He'd schedule important client calls during my lunch breaks, then act frustrated when I needed a few minutes to prepare. The other team members noticed but said nothing. Lisa Rodriguez, who worked in graphic design, would give me sympathetic looks during meetings when Derek dismissed my ideas. She'd occasionally stop by my desk afterward to tell me she thought my suggestions were brilliant, but she never spoke up in the moment. The workplace culture at Apex was clear. Derek had power, and challenging him was career suicide. Rachel Kim, the department director and Derek's boss, was a sharp woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on results. She trusted Derek to manage his team effectively and rarely interfered with day-to-day operations. During the few interactions I had with her, she seemed impressed with my work ethic and the metrics I was producing, but Derek was always present to steer the conversation toward broader team accomplishments. Despite the toxic environment, I loved the actual work. Marketing felt like solving puzzles with creativity and data, and I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of what made campaigns successful. During my evenings and weekends, I began taking on freelance projects to supplement my income and develop my skills further. What started as small social media management gigs for local restaurants and retail shops gradually evolved into comprehensive digital marketing strategies for larger businesses. I registered Bright Strategy Consulting as an LLC, working from my modest apartment in Scottsdale. The space was small but organized, with a dedicated home office that overlooked a community pool. I invested in professional software, built a portfolio website, and slowly began attracting clients who needed the kind of strategic thinking that Apex charged premium rates for but rarely delivered. My freelance work was thriving, generating almost as much income as my day job, but I kept it completely separate from my life at Apex. The consulting business taught me lessons that my corporate job never could. Working directly with business owners and entrepreneurs, I learned to present ideas with confidence, negotiate contracts, and deliver results that directly impacted bottom lines. My clients valued my insights and implemented my recommendations, giving me a level of professional satisfaction that was completely absent from my experience at Apex. One evening, while working on a campaign strategy for a local tech startup, I received a message through my consulting website. The inquiry was from someone at Phoenix Tech Innovations, a rapidly growing software development company that specialized in business automation tools. They were looking for a marketing partner to help them expand their presence in the Southwest market, and they'd found my website through a referral from one of my existing clients. The initial conversation was promising. Phoenix Tech Innovations had ambitious growth goals, a solid product offering, and the budget to execute comprehensive marketing campaigns. They were frustrated with their current marketing agency, which was producing mediocre results despite charging premium fees. They wanted someone who could think strategically, execute flawlessly, and deliver measurable results. Over the next few weeks, I developed a detailed proposal for Phoenix Tech Innovations that outlined a 6-month digital marketing strategy. The proposal included market analysis, competitor research, content development, paid advertising. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Advertising campaigns, and social media management. It was the most comprehensive consulting package I'd ever created, and the potential contract value was significant enough to change my financial situation completely. During this same period, things at Apex were becoming increasingly difficult. Derek had begun micromanaging my work to an almost absurd degree, requiring me to get approval for social media posts that I'd been creating independently for months. He questioned every decision I made, from the hashtags I chose to the images I selected for campaigns. His criticism was constant and often contradictory, suggesting changes that would obviously reduce campaign effectiveness just to assert his authority. The stress was affecting my sleep and my confidence. I found myself second-guessing decisions that should have been automatic, overthinking simple tasks, and feeling anxious every time I had to interact with Derek. But my consulting work remained a source of energy and optimism. The contrast between how my freelance clients treated me and how Derek treated me was stark and increasingly difficult to ignore. Phoenix Tech Innovations accepted my proposal with enthusiasm, praising the depth of my analysis and the creativity of my strategic recommendations. The 6-month contract was worth more than my annual salary at Apex, and they hinted at additional opportunities if the initial engagement went well. I was careful to schedule all consulting work outside of my regular office hours, using vacation days for important client meetings and handling most communication through email and video calls. The campaign I developed for Phoenix Tech Innovations exceeded every performance metric we'd established. Their website traffic increased by 200%, lead generation improved by 150%, and their social media engagement rates were consistently higher than industry benchmarks. The client was thrilled with the results and began discussing a longer-term partnership that would include additional services and a significantly larger budget. Meanwhile, at Apex, Derek's behavior was becoming more erratic and vindictive. He'd begun scheduling last-minute meetings that conflicted with my planned consulting work, forcing me to reschedule client calls and work even later into the evenings. He questioned my dedication to the company, suggesting that I seemed distracted and uncommitted. During team meetings, he'd single me out for criticism over minor issues, while ignoring similar or worse mistakes made by other team members. The breaking point came during our monthly department review meeting. Derek had called the session to discuss recent campaign performance and upcoming projects. The conference room was packed with the entire marketing team, plus Rachel Kim and several representatives from other departments. Derek went through each team member's work systematically, offering feedback and setting expectations for the following month. When he reached my section of the presentation, his tone shifted noticeably. Instead of discussing the impressive metrics my campaigns had generated, he focused on a minor formatting error in one report and a social media post that had received fewer likes than expected. He criticized my time management, questioned my strategic thinking, and suggested that I was struggling to meet the basic requirements of my position. Then he said something that changed everything. Looking directly at me while addressing the room, he declared that some people simply weren't cut out for strategic marketing work, and that perhaps I'd be better suited for administrative tasks where my limitations wouldn't impact client relationships. He suggested that worthless employees who couldn't handle their current responsibilities shouldn't expect advancement opportunities, and that the department needed to focus on team members who could actually contribute value. The room fell silent. Even Derek seemed surprised by how harsh his words had sounded spoken aloud. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger, but I maintained my composure. I nodded professionally, made a note in my planner, and thanked him for the feedback. Inside, I was calculating exactly how much notice I'd need to give before transitioning my consulting business into a full-time venture. What Derek didn't know was that Rachel Kim had been having private conversations with Phoenix Tech Innovations about their remarkable turnaround in digital marketing performance. The client had been so impressed with their results that they'd reached out to Apex directly, asking if the agency would be interested in handling similar projects for other companies in their network. Rachel had been trying to identify which of her team members was responsible for the innovative strategies and exceptional execution that Phoenix Tech Innovations kept praising. The irony was about to become delicious, and Derek had no idea what was coming. The humiliation in that conference room didn't end when the meeting dispersed. Derek's words followed me back to my desk like a toxic cloud, settling over my workspace and making it difficult to concentrate on even the simplest tasks. My colleagues avoided eye contact as they filed past, some looking genuinely uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed, others seeming relieved that they hadn't been the target of Derek's verbal assault. Lisa Rodriguez was the first person to approach me after the meeting. She waited until Derek had left for lunch before sliding her chair over to my desk, her expression a mixture of sympathy and outrage. She spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward Derek's empty office to make sure he wasn't returning unexpectedly. She told me that what had happened was completely unprofessional, and that everyone in the room knew my work was consistently excellent. She'd been at Apex for 4 years, and had never seen Derek attack someone so publicly and personally. But sympathy, while appreciated, didn't change the fundamental reality of my situation. Derek had made his position clear. He saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a talent to be developed. The other team members might privately disagree with his assessment, but none of them had the authority or the courage to challenge him directly. Rachel Kim had witnessed the entire exchange without intervention, which suggested she either agreed with Derek's evaluation or was content to let him manage his team as he saw fit. That afternoon, I found myself staring at my computer screen without really seeing it, my mind replaying Derek's words and analyzing every possible interpretation. The phrase "worthless employees" kept echoing in my thoughts, each repetition making me angrier and more determined to prove him wrong. I'd spent 3 years building campaigns that outperformed departmental averages, generating results that directly contributed to Apex's revenue and reputation. The data was undeniable, yet Derek had dismissed my contributions as if they were statistical anomalies rather than consistent achievements. The cognitive dissonance was almost overwhelming. During my lunch break, I reviewed the analytics dashboard for my most recent campaigns, confirming what I already knew. My work was not just meeting expectations but significantly exceeding them. The social media campaigns I'd developed had engagement rates that were 40% higher than industry standards. The content marketing strategies I'd implemented had generated leads at a cost per acquisition rate that was 30% below budget projections. The email marketing sequences I'd designed had open rates and click-through rates that consistently ranked in the top 10% of our industry benchmarks. Yet Derek had characterized this performance as inadequate, suggesting that I was struggling with basic job requirements and unsuited for strategic work. The disconnect between objective reality and his public assessment was so dramatic that it seemed almost deliberately malicious. I began to wonder if Derek's criticism was less about my actual performance and more about his need to maintain a hierarchical dynamic that positioned him as the source of all strategic thinking and creative direction. The rest of that week passed in a haze of tension and awkwardness. Derek seemed energized by his public display of dominance, finding new opportunities to question my decisions and manage my projects. He required me to submit detailed explanations for social media posts that had previously been approved with minimal oversight. He questioned my choice of stock photography for blog articles, suggesting that my visual selections demonstrated poor judgment and lack of brand understanding. He even criticized the font choices in my presentation templates, implying that my design sensibilities were unprofessional and inconsistent with company standards. Each criticism felt like a deliberate attempt to erode my confidence and establish his authority over every aspect of my work. The message was clear: I was not trusted to make independent decisions, and my role was to execute his vision, rather than contribute my own strategic thinking. The creative aspects of marketing that had initially attracted me to the field were being systematically stripped away, leaving only administrative tasks and mechanical execution of predetermined strategies. But while Derek was busy asserting his dominance at Apex, my consulting business was reaching new heights of success and recognition. Phoenix Tech Innovations had been so impressed with the results of their digital marketing campaign that they'd referred me to 3 other companies in their professional network. Each new client brought unique challenges and opportunities, allowing me to develop innovative strategies that pushed the boundaries of traditional marketing approaches. Working with these consulting clients reminded me why I'd fallen in love with marketing in the first place. They valued my insights, implemented my recommendations, and treated me as a strategic partner rather than a subordinate. The contrast between my consulting relationships and my experience at Apex was becoming more pronounced with each passing day, highlighting just how toxic and limiting my corporate environment had become. One particularly successful campaign I developed for a renewable energy startup had generated national attention, earning coverage in industry publications, and establishing my consulting firm as an emerging leader in sustainable business marketing. The case study had been featured in a prominent marketing blog, and I'd been invited to speak at several upcoming conferences about innovative approaches to purpose-driven advertising. The recognition was professionally validating, but also personally significant. After years of having my contributions minimized or ignored at Apex, seeing my work acknowledged and celebrated by industry leaders felt like emerging from a fog of self-doubt and remembering who I actually was. The positive feedback and professional opportunities confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. The problem wasn't my capabilities or my performance, but rather the environment I was working in and the people who were evaluating my contributions. During this same period, I noticed that Rachel Kim had been asking subtle questions about my background and experience during our brief interactions. She seemed genuinely interested in my educational background, my previous internships, and my long-term career goals. The conversations were casual and seemingly random, but there was an undercurrent of evaluation that suggested she was forming her own opinions about my potential and capabilities. Rachel had built her reputation at Apex through strategic thinking and an ability to identify talent that others overlooked. She'd been promoted to department director after successfully leading several high-profile campaigns that had significantly expanded the company's client base and revenue. Her approach to management was notably different from Derek's, emphasizing collaboration and empowerment rather than control and micromanagement. The differences between Rachel and Derek were becoming more apparent as I observed their interactions during team meetings and project discussions. Rachel asked probing questions that demonstrated deep understanding of marketing strategy and consumer psychology. She encouraged debate and welcomed innovative ideas, even when they challenged conventional approaches. Derek, by contrast, seemed more concerned with maintaining his authority and ensuring that his directives were followed without question. I began to suspect that Rachel was forming her own assessment of my capabilities, independent of Derek's characterizations. She'd made several comments about impressive campaign results, without specifying which team members were responsible, but her timing and context suggested she was aware of my individual contributions. During one team meeting, she'd praised the strategic thinking behind a social media campaign that I'd developed entirely on my own, despite Derek's attempts to present it as a collaborative effort. The tension between my professional growth outside of Apex and my stagnation within the company was becoming unsustainable. Each day at the office felt like wearing a costume that no longer fit, pretending to be a junior employee who needed constant supervision and guidance, while simultaneously building a consulting business that was attracting clients and generating revenue at levels that exceeded my corporate salary. The psychological impact of living this double existence was beginning to affect every aspect of my life. I found myself adopting different personas, depending on my environment: submissive and deferential at Apex, confident and strategic with my consulting clients. The constant code switching was exhausting, and I began to resent the energy I was investing in maintaining Derek's illusion of my incompetence. My consulting work was expanding beyond individual client relationships into broader industry recognition. A marketing automation platform had featured one of my campaign strategies in their newsletter, describing it as an innovative approach to customer journey mapping that could be adapted across multiple industries. The exposure had generated inquiries from potential clients across the country, and I was beginning to consider whether my consulting business had grown large enough to support a full-time transition. The financial analysis was promising. My consulting revenue for the previous 6 months had exceeded my annual salary at Apex, and the trajectory suggested continued growth. I had a waiting list of potential clients, a strong reputation in my niche market, and the kind of professional relationships that took years to develop. The only factor keeping me at Apex was a combination of inertia and uncertainty about leaving the perceived security of corporate employment. But Derek's escalating hostility was making the decision easier with each passing day. His behavior had moved beyond professional criticism into personal attacks that seemed designed to damage my self-esteem and career prospects. He'd begun questioning my commitment to the company during team meetings, suggesting that I was distracted by outside interests and unable to focus on my primary responsibilities. The irony was that my outside interests were generating exactly the kind of results that Apex claimed to value: innovative strategies, measurable outcomes, and client satisfaction that led to long-term relationships and referrals. The skills I was developing through my consulting work were making me a more valuable employee, not a less committed one. But Derek seemed threatened by any evidence of my capabilities, preferring to maintain a narrative that positioned me as a struggling junior employee who needed his guidance and supervision. The breaking point was approaching, though I didn't yet realize how dramatically and publicly it would arrive. Rachel Kim had been conducting her own investigation into the source of some remarkable marketing results that had caught the attention of potential new clients. Phoenix Tech Innovations had been sharing details about their digital marketing transformation with other companies in their network, and several of those companies had reached out to Apex, expressing interest in similar services. The problem was that nobody at Apex, including Derek, could explain exactly how those results had been achieved or which specific strategies had been responsible for the dramatic improvements in engagement and conversion rates. The campaign tactics and strategic approaches that Phoenix Tech Innovations was praising didn't match any of the standard methodologies that Derek typically employed with clients. Rachel had begun asking pointed questions about recent campaign development processes, trying to understand which team members had been involved in strategy creation and execution. Derek's answers were vague and defensive, suggesting that he was either unaware of the specific tactics that had generated such impressive results, or reluctant to provide details that might diminish his role in the success. Meanwhile, Phoenix Tech Innovations was pressing for more advanced strategies and expanded service offerings, expecting Apex to build on the foundation of their previous campaign success. They'd scheduled a major presentation meeting to discuss a potential long-term partnership that could become one of Apex's largest and most prestigious client relationships. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would expose the gap between Derek's perceived expertise and the actual source of the innovative strategies that had generated such impressive results. Rachel was beginning to suspect that Derek's explanations didn't align with the evidence, and Phoenix Tech Innovations was about to discover that their trusted marketing partner wasn't actually employed by the agency they thought they were working with. The convergence of these circumstances was creating a perfect storm that would soon reveal the truth about who was really responsible for the strategic thinking and execution that had impressed clients and generated industry recognition. Derek's public humiliation of me had been intended to establish his dominance and diminish my standing within the company, but it had actually accelerated a chain of events that would ultimately expose his own limitations and dependencies. The transformation I was undergoing wasn't just professional, but fundamentally personal. Each consulting success was rebuilding my confidence and reminding me of my actual capabilities. The positive feedback from clients was counteracting years of Derek's systematic undermining, allowing me to remember who I was before I'd been conditioned to doubt my own judgment and abilities. I was beginning to realize that the problem had never been my performance or potential, but rather my willingness to accept an environment that didn't recognize or value my contributions. The skills that Derek dismissed as inadequate were generating remarkable results and industry recognition when applied in contexts that appreciated strategic thinking and innovative execution. The next phase of this story would test everything I'd learned about standing up for myself and recognizing my own worth, but I was finally ready for that confrontation. The weeks following Derek's public humiliation felt like living in two completely different universes. At Apex Digital Solutions, I was the struggling coordinator who apparently couldn't handle basic responsibilities and needed constant supervision. But in my apartment in Scottsdale, working late into the night, with my laptop and my growing list of consulting clients, I was a strategic marketing expert whose campaigns were generating industry buzz and impressive revenue growth. The psychological whiplash was intense. During the day, I'd sit through meetings where Derek questioned my ability to choose appropriate hashtags for social media posts, treating me like an intern who needed remedial training in basic marketing concepts. Then I'd go home and participate in video calls with CEOs and business owners who valued my strategic insights and implemented my recommendations without hesitation. The contrast was so stark that I sometimes wondered if I was living in some kind of alternate reality. My consulting business had evolved far beyond what I'd originally envisioned when I started taking on freelance projects to supplement my income. Bright Strategy Consulting now had a professional website, a growing portfolio of case studies, and a reputation for delivering results that exceeded client expectations. The renewable energy startup campaign that had gained national attention was just one example of the innovative work I was producing outside of Apex's restrictive environment. What had started as a side hustle was becoming a legitimate business, with the potential for significant growth and expansion. I'd established relationships with graphic designers, copywriters, and web developers who could handle specialized aspects of client projects, allowing me to focus on strategy development and campaign management. The network I was building consisted of talented professionals who shared my commitment to excellence and creative problem solving. The financial growth was equally impressive. My consulting revenue had increased by 300% over the past year, and I was regularly turning down projects because my schedule was completely booked. The rates I was charging reflected the value I was delivering, and clients were willing to pay premium prices for strategies that generated measurable results. Several clients had already renewed their contracts for extended engagements, and referrals were generating more opportunities than I could realistically handle while maintaining my full-time position at Apex. But the most significant development was the recognition I was receiving from industry leaders and publications. The case study featuring my renewable energy campaign had been republished in 3 different marketing journals, each one highlighting different aspects of the strategic approach I developed. Marketing conferences were inviting me to speak about innovative digital strategies, and I'd been quoted in several articles about emerging trends in purpose-driven advertising. The irony was becoming more pronounced with each achievement. While Derek was publicly questioning my basic competencies, marketing professionals across the country were recognizing my work as cutting-edge and strategically sophisticated. The disconnect between these two realities was so dramatic that it would have been comical if it hadn't been so personally damaging to endure Derek's constant criticism and micromanagement. Phoenix Tech Innovations had become my flagship client, and their success story was attracting attention from other companies in the technology sector. The comprehensive digital marketing strategy I developed for them had not only exceeded their initial goals, but had established them as a thought leader in their industry. Their CEO had been featured in several business publications, crediting their marketing transformation for the company's rapid growth and increased market visibility. The relationship with Phoenix Tech Innovations had evolved beyond a typical client-consultant arrangement into a strategic partnership that was benefiting both organizations. They were referring other companies to my consulting firm, and I was developing specialized expertise in technology sector marketing that was becoming increasingly valuable in the current business environment. The revenue from this single client relationship was approaching 6 figures annually, with potential for significant expansion as their business continued to grow. During this same period, I noticed that Rachel Kim was paying closer attention to my work at Apex, asking specific questions about campaign development processes and strategic decision-making. Her inquiries seemed casual, but there was an underlying intensity that suggested she was investigating something specific. She'd begun requesting detailed reports about recent projects, including timelines and contributor information that went beyond the usual departmental summaries. Rachel's management style was notably different from Derek's approach, and I was beginning to understand why she'd been promoted to department director, while Derek remained in his current position despite years of experience. She asked probing questions that demonstrated deep understanding of marketing psychology and consumer behavior. She encouraged innovative thinking and welcomed suggestions that challenged conventional approaches. Most importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in identifying and developing talent rather than simply maintaining existing hierarchies. The contrast between Rachel's leadership approach and Derek's management style was becoming more apparent during team meetings and project discussions. When Rachel facilitated meetings, team members contributed ideas freely and engaged in productive debates about strategy and execution. When Derek led discussions, the atmosphere was tense and restrictive, with team members limiting their contributions to safe, predictable suggestions that wouldn't challenge his authority or expertise. I began to suspect that Rachel was conducting her own evaluation of team capabilities, independent of Derek's assessments and recommendations. She'd made several comments about impressive campaign results without specifying which team members were responsible, but her timing and context suggested she was aware of individual contributions that Derek hadn't properly acknowledged. During one particularly revealing team meeting, she'd praised the strategic thinking behind a social media campaign that I'd developed entirely independently, despite Derek's attempts to present it as a collaborative departmental effort. The tension between my professional growth outside of Apex and my stagnation within the company was creating internal conflicts that were becoming harder to manage. Each day at the office required me to suppress my actual capabilities and expertise, pretending to need guidance and supervision while simultaneously building a business that was generating recognition and revenue at levels that exceeded my corporate compensation. The psychological impact of maintaining this double existence was affecting my sleep, my stress levels, and my overall well-being. I found myself becoming increasingly resentful of the energy I was investing in Derek's illusion of my incompetence, especially when that same energy could be directed toward consulting projects that were making meaningful impacts on client businesses and advancing my professional reputation. My consulting work was expanding into new industries and service offerings, creating opportunities for specialization and expertise development that weren't available within Apex's limited scope and conservative approach. I was working with startups, established corporations, and nonprofit organizations, each presenting unique challenges that required creative problem-solving and strategic innovation. The diversity of projects was accelerating my professional development and building a skill set that was becoming increasingly valuable in the evolving digital marketing landscape. The recognition I was receiving extended beyond individual client relationships into broader industry acknowledgement. A prominent marketing automation platform had featured one of my customer journey mapping strategies in their monthly newsletter, describing it as an innovative approach that could be adapted across multiple industries and business models. The exposure had generated inquiries from potential clients in different geographic markets, and I was beginning to consider whether my consulting business had grown large enough to support geographic expansion and additional service offerings. The financial analysis was compelling. My consulting revenue for the current year was on track to exceed my Apex salary by a significant margin, and the trajectory suggested continued growth and expansion opportunities. I had established relationships with reliable subcontractors, developed efficient project management systems, and built a reputation that was generating consistent referrals and repeat business. The infrastructure for a successful full-time consulting practice was already in place and functioning effectively. But leaving Apex represented more than just a career transition. It would be a fundamental shift in how I viewed my professional identity and capabilities. For 3 years, I'd allowed Derek's assessments and criticisms to influence my self-perception, gradually accepting limitations that weren't based on objective reality, but rather on his need to maintain a particular power dynamic. Breaking free from that psychological framework required acknowledging that the problem had never been my performance or potential, but rather my willingness to accept an environment that didn't recognize or value my actual contributions. The breakthrough moment came during a routine client check-in call with Phoenix Tech Innovations. Their marketing director mentioned that they'd been sharing details about their digital marketing transformation with other companies in their professional network, and several of those companies had expressed interest in working with the agency that had delivered such impressive results. She asked if I could facilitate an introduction to my colleagues at Apex Digital Solutions, since they were interested in exploring similar strategic partnerships. The request created an immediate dilemma. Phoenix Tech Innovations believed they were working with Apex Digital Solutions, not realizing that their primary contact and strategy developer was actually an independent consultant who happened to be employed by the agency in a completely unrelated capacity. The success they were celebrating and referring to other companies was entirely the result of my consulting work, not anything that had been developed or implemented through Apex's official client services. I realized that Rachel Kim's recent inquiries about campaign development processes were likely connected to the referral requests that Apex was receiving from companies in Phoenix Tech Innovations network. She was probably trying to understand which team members had been responsible for the innovative strategies that were generating such positive client feedback and industry recognition. Derek's vague and defensive responses to her questions made sense now. He was unable to explain tactics and approaches that he hadn't developed or implemented. The convergence of these circumstances was creating a situation that would soon expose the reality behind the success that Phoenix Tech Innovations was praising. Rachel was asking the right questions to uncover the truth about who was actually responsible for the strategic work that was impressing clients and generating referral opportunities. Derek's inability to provide specific details about campaign development and execution was raising red flags that would eventually lead to more intensive investigation. Meanwhile, Phoenix Tech Innovations was pressing for expanded services and advanced strategies, expecting Apex to build on the foundation of their previous campaign success. They'd scheduled a comprehensive strategy session to discuss potential long-term partnerships and additional service offerings, anticipating that the team responsible for their initial success would be leading the conversation and presenting new strategic approaches. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would reveal the disconnect between Derek's perceived expertise and the actual source of the innovative work that had generated such impressive results. Rachel's investigation was leading her toward conclusions that would challenge Derek's authority and credibility within the department. Phoenix Tech Innovations was about to discover that their trusted marketing partner wasn't actually employed by Apex in the capacity they'd assumed. The transformation I was experiencing wasn't just professional but fundamentally personal. Each consulting success was rebuilding my confidence and helping me remember my actual capabilities and potential. The positive feedback from clients was counteracting years of Derek's systematic undermining, allowing me to develop a more accurate and empowering self-assessment based on objective results and industry recognition. I was beginning to understand that accepting Derek's characterization of my abilities and potential had been a choice, not an inevitable consequence of my actual limitations. The skills he dismissed as inadequate were generating remarkable results and professional opportunities when applied in environments that valued strategic thinking and innovative execution. The problem had never been my capabilities, it was my willingness to accept an environment that systematically undermined and minimized my contributions. The next phase of this story would test everything I'd learned about recognizing my own worth and standing up for my professional interests, but I was finally ready for that challenge. The pivotal moment arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, with Derek scheduling an impromptu team meeting to discuss what he called performance inconsistencies and strategic alignment issues. The conference room was packed with the usual suspects, the entire marketing team, Rachel Kim, and several department heads who rarely attended our routine meetings. The energy in the room felt different, more formal and consequential than our typical weekly check-ins. Derek had prepared an elaborate presentation about team productivity metrics and individual contribution assessments. He clicked through slides that analyzed campaign performance, budget utilization, and client satisfaction scores, speaking with the kind of authority that comes from believing your own narrative regardless of contradictory evidence. His tone was professorial and condescending, as if he were explaining basic concepts to students who had repeatedly failed to grasp fundamental principles. When he reached the section about my performance, Derek's criticism was more detailed and personal than usual. He displayed a chart showing what he claimed were declining engagement rates on my social media campaigns, despite the fact that my actual metrics had consistently exceeded departmental averages. He questioned my strategic thinking capabilities, suggesting that my approach to content development was too simplistic for sophisticated client requirements. He even criticized my communication style, implying that my interactions with clients lacked the professionalism and expertise that Apex's reputation demanded. The attack was so comprehensive and vindictive that several team members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly recognizing that Derek's assessment didn't align with the reality of my work performance. Lisa Rodriguez looked genuinely angry, her jaw clenched as she listened to Derek systematically demolish my professional reputation in front of colleagues and department leaders. Even some of the quieter team members seemed disturbed by the intensity and personal nature of his criticism. But Derek wasn't finished. He concluded his assessment by suggesting that some team members simply weren't equipped for strategic marketing roles and might be better suited for administrative or support functions where their limitations wouldn't impact client relationships. He looked directly at me while making this recommendation, his expression combining false concern with barely concealed satisfaction. The message was unmistakable. He was positioning me for demotion or termination, using this public forum to build a case for removing me from any meaningful responsibilities. The room fell silent when Derek finished his presentation, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. I felt my face burning with humiliation and rage, but I maintained my composure, taking notes as if his criticism were constructive feedback rather than a calculated character assassination. Inside, I was calculating the exact timeline for transitioning my consulting business into a full-time venture, realizing that Derek had just made my decision significantly easier. That's when Rachel Kim stood up. Her expression was neutral, professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she had information that would change the trajectory of this meeting dramatically. She thanked Derek for his thorough analysis and asked if she could share some recent developments that might provide additional context for the team's performance evaluation. Rachel opened her laptop and connected it to the conference room projector, replacing Derek's slides with a new presentation that she'd apparently prepared specifically for this meeting. The first slide displayed the logo of Phoenix Tech Innovations alongside impressive performance metrics that immediately captured everyone's attention. She explained that this client had experienced remarkable growth in digital marketing performance over the past 6 months, generating results that had caught the attention of industry leaders and potential new clients. She clicked to the next slide, which showed detailed analytics demonstrating engagement rates that were 40% above industry standards, conversion metrics that exceeded campaign goals by significant margins, and client satisfaction scores that were the highest in company history. The data was compelling and undeniable, representing exactly the kind of strategic success that every marketing agency aspired to achieve for their clients. Derek nodded approvingly, clearly assuming that Rachel was about to praise his leadership and strategic vision for delivering such impressive results. He straightened in his chair and prepared to accept credit for the campaign success that was being displayed on the conference room screen. Several team members looked confused, unsure how this presentation related to Derek's criticism of my performance and capabilities. Rachel continued by explaining that Phoenix Tech Innovations had been so impressed with their results that they'd referred multiple companies to Apex Digital Solutions, creating potential new business opportunities worth several $1 million in annual revenue. She emphasized that this level of client satisfaction and referral generation was extremely rare in their industry, representing the kind of strategic partnership that could transform the agency's reputation and growth trajectory. The next slide displayed email testimonials from Phoenix Tech Innovations praising the innovative strategic thinking, creative execution, and exceptional project management that had delivered such outstanding results. The client specifically mentioned the sophisticated understanding of their target market, the data-driven approach to campaign optimization, and the proactive communication that had made the partnership both productive and enjoyable. Derek was beaming now, clearly anticipating recognition for his role in generating these remarkable results and referral opportunities. He'd probably already composed his acceptance speech for the praise he expected Rachel to deliver, outlining his strategic vision and management approach that had enabled such exceptional client outcomes. But Rachel's next slide changed everything. It displayed a detailed timeline of campaign development and implementation, showing exactly which team member had been responsible for each aspect of the strategic planning and execution. The data was comprehensive and specific, including email communications, project management records, and client interaction logs that painted a complete picture of who had actually done the work that generated such impressive results. My name appeared throughout the timeline as the primary strategic developer, project manager, and client contact for every significant campaign element that had contributed to Phoenix Tech Innovations' success. The documentation showed that I had developed the comprehensive digital marketing strategy, created the content calendars, managed the social media campaigns, and maintained direct communication with the client throughout the entire engagement. Derek's name appeared nowhere in the project records except for a few brief approval emails that demonstrated his minimal involvement in the actual strategic work. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, showing that he had played essentially no role in developing or implementing the innovative approaches that had generated such exceptional results and client satisfaction. The room was completely silent as Rachel allowed the information to sink in. Several team members looked shocked, clearly realizing for the first time the extent to which Derek had been taking credit for work he hadn't actually performed. Lisa Rodriguez was staring at Derek with undisguised contempt, apparently disgusted by the revelation of his deception and manipulation. Rachel clicked to the next slide, which displayed additional evidence that made the situation even more damaging for Derek's credibility. She discovered that Phoenix Tech Innovations had never actually been an official Apex client, instead working directly with an independent consultant, who had been providing strategic marketing services through a separate business entity. The client had assumed they were working with Apex because their primary contact was employed by the agency, not realizing that the exceptional work they were celebrating had been performed entirely outside of the company's official client services. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Derek had been taking credit not just for work performed by a team member, but for work that hadn't even been done through Apex's official client relationships. The success he'd been implicitly claiming was the result of an independent consulting business that had no connection to his management or strategic oversight. Rachel's final slide displayed a simple question that hung in the air like an accusation: who is actually responsible for the strategic thinking and execution that generated these remarkable results? She looked directly at Derek, waiting for an explanation that everyone in the room knew he couldn't provide. Derek's face had turned pale, then red, as the full scope of his exposure became clear. He stammered something about team collaboration and oversight responsibilities, but his words sounded hollow and defensive in the context of the overwhelming evidence Rachel had presented. He'd been caught taking credit for work he hadn't done, claiming expertise he didn't possess, and building his professional reputation on accomplishments that belonged to someone else. But the confrontation wasn't over. Rachel turned to address me directly, her expression shifting from investigative to congratulatory. She explained that Phoenix Tech Innovations CEO had specifically requested a meeting with the strategic team responsible for their marketing transformation, expressing interest in expanding their partnership and potentially investing in additional service offerings. The client wanted to discuss advanced strategies and long-term collaboration opportunities with the person who had demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of their business needs and market positioning. The revelation sent shockwaves through the conference room. Not only had I been performing at a level that exceeded Derek's characterizations, but I'd been doing it independently while generating client relationships and business opportunities that Derek couldn't have achieved through official company channels. The contrast between his public criticism of my capabilities and the objective evidence of my strategic expertise was so dramatic that his credibility was completely destroyed. Rachel continued by explaining that she'd been conducting a comprehensive review of team contributions and individual performance metrics, triggered by the disconnect between client feedback and internal assessments. The investigation had revealed not just Derek's misrepresentation of my work, but a pattern of taking credit for team member contributions while systematically undermining their confidence and career development. The evidence she'd compiled painted a picture of Derek as a manager who was more concerned with maintaining his authority than developing talent or delivering results for clients. His approach to leadership had been creating a toxic environment that was driving away capable team members and limiting the department's potential for growth and innovation. Rachel announced that effective immediately, she would be restructuring the department to better recognize and utilize individual talents and capabilities. She offered me a promotion to senior strategic consultant with a salary increase that reflected my actual contributions and market value. The position would give me autonomy to develop innovative strategies and work directly with high-value clients who appreciated sophisticated marketing approaches. But the most satisfying moment came when Rachel addressed Derek's future with the company. She explained that his performance review had revealed significant gaps between his claimed expertise and his actual capabilities, particularly in areas of strategic thinking and client relationship management. His tendency to take credit for other people's work while providing minimal value-added contribution had created liability issues that couldn't be ignored. Derek was being reassigned to a junior account management position, where his responsibilities would be limited to administrative tasks and basic client communication. His salary would be adjusted accordingly, and he would report to a new supervisor, who would provide the kind of oversight and guidance that his performance clearly required. The reversal was complete and devastating. Derek, who had spent months publicly questioning my competence and suitability for strategic work, was being demoted to a position that reflected his actual capabilities and contributions.
Meanwhile, I was being promoted and recognized for achievements that spoke for themselves through objective metrics and client satisfaction. The meeting concluded with Rachel scheduling individual conversations with each team member to discuss career development opportunities and ensure that everyone's contributions were being properly recognized and compensated. She emphasized that the department's success depended on identifying and nurturing talent rather than maintaining artificial hierarchies that limited growth and innovation. As the team filed out of the conference room, the atmosphere was electric with the energy of dramatic change and long overdue justice. Several colleagues approached me with congratulations and apologies, acknowledging that they'd known Derek's assessments were unfair but hadn't felt empowered to challenge his authority directly. Lisa Rodriguez was particularly emotional, expressing regret for not speaking up sooner and admiration for my perseverance through months of unfair treatment. She said she'd learned important lessons about the importance of supporting colleagues who are being targeted by toxic managers, and she committed to being more courageous in similar situations in the future. Derek himself avoided eye contact as he gathered his materials and left the conference room, his humiliation complete and his authority permanently destroyed. The man who had called me worthless in front of the entire team was now facing the consequences of his own inadequacies and ethical failures. That afternoon, I met with Rachel to discuss the details of my promotion and the strategic direction for my new role. She apologized for allowing Derek's behavior to continue for so long, explaining that she'd been gathering evidence to ensure any personnel decisions were supported by comprehensive documentation. She'd suspected that Derek was misrepresenting team contributions, but the extent of his deception had exceeded even her worst assumptions. Rachel was particularly interested in my consulting business and the innovative strategies I'd developed for clients outside of Apex. She proposed a partnership arrangement that would allow me to maintain my independent consulting practice while also contributing to Apex's strategic capabilities and client offerings. The arrangement would benefit both parties. I would have the resources and support of an established agency, while Apex would gain access to cutting-edge strategies and client relationships that were already generating impressive results.
The proposal was generous and forward-thinking, reflecting the kind of collaborative leadership approach that Derek had never demonstrated. Rachel understood that talented professionals needed autonomy and recognition to perform at their highest levels, and she was willing to create innovative arrangements that benefited everyone involved. Within a month, my new role at Apex had transformed not just my professional responsibilities but my entire career trajectory. I was leading strategic initiatives for the agency's most important clients, developing innovative campaigns that were generating industry recognition, and mentoring junior team members who showed promise for strategic thinking and creative problem-solving. The partnership with my consulting business created synergies that neither venture could have achieved independently. Apex gained access to specialized expertise and established client relationships, while my consulting practice benefited from the resources and credibility of an established agency. The arrangement was generating revenue and recognition that exceeded both parties' individual capabilities. Derek's demotion had ripple effects throughout the department that improved morale and productivity significantly. Team members who had been suppressed by his authoritarian management style began contributing innovative ideas and taking ownership of strategic initiatives. The collaborative environment that Rachel fostered allowed everyone to perform at higher levels and develop their capabilities more effectively. The contrast between Derek's approach to leadership and Rachel's management philosophy became a case study in how different styles impact team performance and individual development. Derek's need to control and diminish others had created an environment that limited everyone's potential, while Rachel's commitment to empowerment and recognition was unleashing creativity and innovation that benefited the entire organization. 6 months later, I was invited to keynote a major marketing conference about innovative strategies for client relationship development and strategic partnership building. The presentation drew from my experience building successful consulting relationships and transitioning those partnerships into expanded agency offerings. The audience included marketing professionals from across the country, many of whom implemented strategies I developed and achieved similar results in their own client relationships. During the question and answer session, someone asked about overcoming workplace obstacles and dealing with managers who don't recognize or support innovative thinking. I shared my story about Derek's systematic undermining and the importance of building evidence of your capabilities independent of internal recognition. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many attendees expressing appreciation for the honest discussion about workplace dynamics and power structures that can limit professional development. The conference presentation was recorded and shared widely within the marketing community, generating speaking opportunities at additional events and establishing my reputation as both a strategic innovator and an advocate for professional empowerment. The recognition validated not just my technical capabilities but my ability to inspire and educate other professionals who were facing similar challenges in their own careers. Derek's trajectory after his demotion was predictably downward. Unable to maintain the illusion of expertise without other people's work to claim as his own, his performance in the junior account management role revealed the extent of his actual limitations. Within a year, he'd left Apex entirely, reportedly struggling to find positions that matched his inflated self-assessment and salary expectations. The lesson was clear: sustainable success requires genuine capability and ethical behavior, not just political maneuvering and credit-taking. Derek's approach to career advancement had created temporary advantages that ultimately collapsed when subjected to objective evaluation and accountability. Meanwhile, my consulting business continued expanding, now operating as a strategic partnership with Apex that was generating opportunities for both ventures. The recognition I'd received through industry conferences and publications was attracting high-value clients who appreciated innovative approaches and strategic sophistication. The financial success exceeded anything I'd imagined when I first started taking on freelance projects to supplement my corporate salary. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the transformation was the personal growth and confidence that came from standing up for my professional worth and capabilities. Derek's attempts to diminish my self-perception had ultimately strengthened my resolve and clarified my understanding of my actual value in the marketplace. The experience taught me that accepting other people's limited assessment of your capabilities is a choice, not an inevitable consequence of objective limitations. Derek's characterization of me as worthless had been projection of his own insecurities and fears, not an accurate evaluation of my potential or performance. Today I mentor other professionals who are dealing with toxic managers and workplace environments that don't recognize their contributions. The strategies I share focus on building evidence of capability, developing alternative sources of validation, and maintaining confidence in your own worth regardless of external criticism or undermining. The story that began with Derek calling me worthless in front of our entire team ended with him losing his authority, his credibility, and eventually his job, while I gained recognition, advancement, and the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from having your actual capabilities acknowledged and rewarded. Sometimes the people who try to diminish you are really just revealing their own limitations and fears. Derek's need to call me worthless said everything about his insecurities and nothing about my actual value. The irony was that his attempts to destroy my confidence ultimately accelerated my recognition and success, while destroying his own credibility and career prospects. The most powerful revenge isn't retaliation, it's simply becoming so successful that your critic's opinion becomes irrelevant. Derek thought he was putting me in my place, but he was actually putting himself out of business. The transformation that followed Rachel's explosive revelation wasn't just professional mino, it was a complete reconstruction of everything I thought I knew about power, worth, and the price of staying silent. Derek's public humiliation in that conference room had been swift and devastating, but the real work of rebuilding began in the weeks that followed, when the dust settled and I had to figure out who I was without his voice constantly telling me who I wasn't. My new role as senior strategic consultant came with a corner office that overlooked the Phoenix skyline, the same view I'd admired from the 15th floor, but now from a position of actual authority rather than suppressed ambition. The office was spacious and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the Arizona sunlight and reminded me daily that I was no longer working in Derek's shadow. Rachel had insisted I choose my own furniture and equipment, emphasizing that the space should reflect my personal style and professional needs rather than corporate standards that had been designed by people who didn't understand how creative work actually happened. The salary increase was substantial, more than doubling my previous compensation and finally aligning my paycheck with the value I'd been generating for years. But beyond the financial recognition, the promotion came with something even more valuable: complete autonomy over my strategic decisions and direct access to the agency's most important clients. Rachel had structured the role specifically to leverage my proven capabilities while giving me the freedom to innovate and experiment without layers of approval and oversight. The partnership arrangement between my consulting business and Apex Digital Solutions was unlike anything the agency had attempted before, reflecting Rachel's forward-thinking approach to talent retention and business development. Rather than requiring me to choose between my independent practice and corporate employment, she'd created a hybrid model that benefited both ventures. Bright Strategy Consulting became an official strategic partner of Apex, allowing me to maintain my existing client relationships while also contributing to the agency's expanded service offerings. The synergies between these two roles were immediately apparent and incredibly productive. My consulting clients gained access to Apex's creative resources, production capabilities, and technical infrastructure, while the agency benefited from my established relationships and specialized expertise in emerging digital marketing trends. The arrangement was generating revenue streams that neither venture could have achieved independently, and it was attracting attention from other agencies who were interested in implementing similar partnership models. Phoenix Tech Innovations became the flagship example of how this new approach could transform client relationships and business outcomes. Their CEO was thrilled to discover that their trusted marketing consultant was now backed by a full-service agency, and they immediately expanded their engagement to include additional services that required larger teams and more comprehensive resources. The expanded partnership was worth nearly $500,000 annually, representing the kind of strategic relationship that agencies typically spend years trying to develop. But the most satisfying aspect of my new position was the opportunity to mentor other professionals who had been overlooked or undervalued in their current roles. Rachel had asked me to lead a talent development initiative focused on identifying team members who showed strategic potential but hadn't been given opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities. The program was designed to prevent the kind of talent suppression that Derek had practiced, ensuring that innovative thinking was recognized and nurtured rather than threatened and diminished. The first person I identified for the program was Lisa Rodriguez, whose graphic design skills were exceptional but whose strategic insights had been consistently ignored during Derek's tenure. She developed innovative approaches to visual storytelling that could transform how clients connected with their target audiences, but Derek had limited her contributions to technical execution rather than creative strategy. Under the new structure, Lisa was promoted to Creative Strategy Director and given lead responsibility for developing visual campaigns that integrated seamlessly with overall marketing objectives. The transformation in Lisa's confidence and performance was remarkable. Within months, she was creating campaigns that were winning industry awards and generating client testimonials that praised both the aesthetic impact and strategic sophistication of her work. She'd gone from being a talented but suppressed team member to a recognized creative leader whose innovations were influencing industry trends and attracting new business opportunities. The ripple effects of these changes were transforming the entire department culture. Team members who had been conditioned to limit their contributions under Derek's authoritarian management were now taking initiative, proposing innovative solutions, and collaborating effectively on complex projects. The collaborative environment was generating creative synergies that were producing better results for clients while also creating more satisfying work experiences for everyone involved. Rachel's leadership philosophy was proving its effectiveness through measurable improvements in team morale, client satisfaction, and business performance. The department's revenue had increased by 40% since Derek's demotion, and client retention rates were at historic highs. More importantly, the agency was attracting top talent from other firms who were drawn by the reputation for innovation and professional development that had replaced the toxic atmosphere Derek had created. The contrast between these two management approaches became a case study that Rachel presented at industry conferences about leadership effectiveness and organizational culture. She used our department's transformation as evidence that traditional hierarchical structures often suppress the very creativity and innovation that companies claim to value. Her presentations were generating consulting opportunities for organizational development work, creating an additional revenue stream, while establishing Apex's reputation as a thought leader in progressive management practices. Meanwhile, Derek's post-demotion trajectory was becoming a cautionary tale about the unsustainability of leadership styles based on intimidation and credit-taking rather than genuine capability and team development. His performance in the junior account management role was consistently below expectations, and his inability to adapt to a position that required actual work rather than just oversight was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone who interacted with him. The accounts Derek managed were experiencing higher than average client turnover, and several clients had specifically requested different account managers after working with him for brief periods.
His communication style, which had been problematic when he had authority to back it up, was completely ineffective when he was in a service role that required diplomacy and customer focus. The gap between his self-perception and his actual capabilities was creating conflicts that were damaging client relationships and requiring intervention from senior management. Rachel had tried to provide Derek with additional training and support, recognizing that his transition to a diminished role was likely difficult and potentially traumatic. But his resistance to feedback and unwillingness to acknowledge his limitations were making it impossible to help him succeed in his new position. He seemed to view the role as temporary punishment rather than an opportunity to develop actual skills and rebuild his professional reputation through demonstrated competence. The inevitable conclusion came about 8 months after his demotion, when Derek submitted his resignation rather than face a formal performance improvement plan that would have required him to meet specific objectives under close supervision. His departure was met with relief rather than regret by most team members, who had found his bitter attitude and passive-aggressive behavior disruptive to the positive culture that was developing under Rachel's leadership. Derek's exit interview revealed the extent to which he blamed external factors for his professional struggles, rather than acknowledging his own contribution to the conflicts and failures that had led to his downfall. He criticized Rachel's management style, questioned the fairness of his performance evaluation, and suggested that the agency's new direction was misguided and unsustainable. His inability to accept responsibility for his actions or learn from his mistakes virtually guaranteed that he would encounter similar problems in future positions. The job market proved less receptive to Derek's inflated self-assessment than he had anticipated. Despite his years of experience and previous title, his references from Apex were lukewarm at best, and his interview performance revealed the gaps between his claimed expertise and his actual capabilities. He eventually accepted a position with a smaller agency at a significantly reduced salary, but even that arrangement lasted less than a year before ending in mutual dissatisfaction. The contrast between Derek's declining trajectory and my ascending career path was stark but not entirely satisfactory. While there was certainly vindication in seeing the person who had tried to destroy my confidence face consequences for his behavior, the real satisfaction came from building something positive rather than just witnessing someone else's failure. Derek's downfall was inevitable, given his approach to leadership and professional relationships, but my success was the result of choices I'd made about how to respond to adversity and develop my capabilities despite obstacles. The speaking opportunities that grew out of my conference presentations were opening doors to consulting relationships with organizations across the country. Companies were hiring me to help them identify and develop overlooked talent, restructure their marketing departments for better innovation and collaboration, and implement strategic approaches that had proven successful in my work with Phoenix Tech Innovations and other clients. These consulting engagements were financially lucrative but also personally fulfilling, allowing me to help other professionals who were facing similar challenges to what I'd experienced under Derek's management. Many of the organizations I worked with had toxic managers who were suppressing talent and limiting their team's potential, and the interventions I designed were helping to transform those environments in ways that benefited everyone involved. One particularly impactful engagement involved a technology company in Seattle where a senior marketing director was systematically undermining his team members in ways that reminded me strongly of Derek's behavior. The company's leadership had noticed declining performance and increasing turnover but hadn't identified the root cause of these problems. My assessment revealed that several highly capable team members were being prevented from contributing their best work by a manager who felt threatened by their skills and potential. The solution required both structural changes and individual development work. I helped the company restructure their marketing department to provide more autonomy and recognition for strategic contributors, while also working directly with team members who had internalized negative messages about their capabilities and potential. The transformation was dramatic, with performance metrics improving significantly within months of implementing the new structure and management approach. The Seattle engagement led to additional opportunities with other companies in the technology sector, establishing my reputation as a specialist in organizational development and talent optimization. The recurring theme in these projects was the discovery of capable professionals who had been limited by poor management rather than personal inadequacies, reinforcing my understanding that toxic leadership creates far more problems than most organizations realize. My consulting business was now generating more revenue annually than my previous Apex salary had provided, and the partnership arrangement with the agency was creating additional income streams that were accelerating my financial growth. But beyond the monetary success, the work was providing the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from making meaningful impacts on other people's careers and organizational effectiveness. The recognition I was receiving extended beyond individual client relationships into broader industry acknowledgement. Marketing publications were featuring my case studies and strategic approaches, and I was being invited to participate in expert panels and industry research projects. The credibility I'd built through consistent results and innovative thinking was opening doors to opportunities that would have been unimaginable during my years under Derek's suppression. 2 years after Derek's departure from Apex, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the Southwest Marketing Summit, the same conference where I'd first spoken about overcoming workplace obstacles and recognizing professional worth. The audience included hundreds of marketing professionals from across the region, many of whom were dealing with their own challenges related to toxic management and unrecognized potential. The presentation I delivered was titled, "From Worthless to Indispensable, Building Professional Value Despite Toxic Leadership," and it drew heavily from my experience with Derek, while also incorporating lessons learned from my consulting work with other organizations. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with audience members expressing appreciation for the honest discussion about workplace dynamics that many people experience, but few are willing to address publicly. During the question and answer session, someone asked about the long-term impact of toxic managers on individual careers and organizational performance. I explained that the damage extends far beyond the immediate victims to include lost innovation, reduced productivity, and decreased competitiveness that affects entire companies and industries. The economic cost of poor management is substantial but often invisible, making it difficult for organizations to recognize and address these problems proactively. Another question focused on strategies for building resilience and maintaining confidence when facing systematic undermining and criticism. I emphasized the importance of developing external sources of validation and evidence of capability, such as the consulting business that had provided me with objective feedback about my skills and potential. The key was creating opportunities to demonstrate competence outside of toxic environments, while building the financial and emotional resources needed to eventually escape those situations. The keynote presentation was recorded and shared widely within the marketing community, generating speaking opportunities at additional conferences and establishing my reputation as both a strategic innovator and an advocate for professional empowerment. The visibility was attracting new clients and partnership opportunities, while also creating a platform for addressing systemic issues that affect many professionals but receive limited attention in traditional business education and development programs. The transformation of my career and personal life was complete but ongoing. The confident, successful professional I'd become was built on the foundation of skills and potential that had always existed but had been suppressed by Derek's toxic management and my own acceptance of his limited assessment of my worth. The difference wasn't in my capabilities, which had remained consistent throughout the experience, but in my environment and my willingness to recognize and assert my actual value. The lesson that emerged from this journey was that accepting other people's negative judgments about your potential is a choice, not an inevitable consequence of objective limitations. Derek's characterization of me as worthless had been projection of his own insecurities and professional inadequacies, not an accurate evaluation of my skills or potential. The problem had never been my capabilities, it was my willingness to allow someone else's fears and limitations to define my understanding of what I could achieve. The mentoring work I was doing with other professionals facing similar challenges was perhaps the most meaningful aspect of my transformed career. Helping people recognize their own worth and develop strategies for escaping toxic situations was creating positive impacts that extended far beyond individual success stories. Each person who found the courage to stand up for their professional value was contributing to cultural changes that would benefit future generations of workers. The financial success and industry recognition were gratifying, but the personal growth and self-knowledge that came from surviving and ultimately thriving after Derek's attempts to destroy my confidence were invaluable. The experience had taught me that resilience isn't just about enduring difficult circumstances, but about maintaining clarity about your own worth and potential despite external pressure to accept limitations that aren't based in reality. Today, when I look out the windows of my corner office at the Phoenix skyline, I remember the person I was 3 years ago who accepted Derek's assessment of my worth and potential. That person wasn't less capable or talented than the successful professional I've become. She was simply operating in an environment that systematically undermined her confidence and limited her opportunities to demonstrate her actual capabilities. The empire I've built from the ashes of Derek's attempts to destroy my career isn't just about professional success or financial achievement. It's about the fundamental recognition that every person has the right to work in an environment that recognizes and nurtures their potential rather than suppressing it out of fear or insecurity. Derek thought he was putting me in my place, but he was actually showing me exactly where I didn't belong and giving me the motivation to build something better. The man who called me worthless in front of our entire team ultimately became worthless himself, not because I wished harm upon him, but because his approach to leadership and professional relationships was unsustainable and destructive. Meanwhile, the person he tried to diminish has become indispensable, not just to my current organization, but to the broader professional community that values innovation, integrity, and the kind of leadership that empowers others rather than diminishing them. Sometimes the greatest gift your critics can give you is the motivation to prove them wrong by becoming everything they said you could never be. Derek's attempts to limit my potential ultimately accelerated my growth and success, while his own limitations became increasingly apparent until they destroyed his career and reputation. The story that began with public humiliation and systematic undermining ends with professional triumph and personal empowerment, but the real victory isn't in Derek's downfall or my success. It's in the understanding that no one has the power to determine your worth except you, and that toxic people reveal more about their own limitations than they ever could about yours. The years that followed my public vindication at Apex brought changes I never could have imagined during those dark months when Derek's daily humiliations made me question everything I thought I knew about my own capabilities.
Success, I discovered, wasn't just about proving your critics wrong or achieving professional recognition. It was about using your platform to create opportunities for others who were trapped in the same cycles of diminishment and suppression that I'd experienced. My consulting practice had evolved into something far beyond what I'd originally envisioned when I first started taking on freelance projects to supplement my corporate income. Bright Strategy Consulting was now a full-service organizational development firm with offices in 3 cities and a team of specialists who focused on identifying and nurturing overlooked talent within corporate environments. We developed proprietary assessment tools and intervention strategies that could quickly identify toxic management patterns and implement structural changes that unleashed previously suppressed potential. The methodology we'd created was based on the understanding that most performance problems in corporate environments weren't actually about individual inadequacies but about systemic issues that prevented capable people from demonstrating their true abilities. Our approach focused on removing barriers rather than trying to fix people who weren't actually broken, and the results were consistently dramatic and measurable. One of our most successful interventions involved a Fortune 500 technology company where an entire marketing division was underperforming despite having recruited top talent from leading universities and competitor organizations. Traditional consulting firms had recommended replacing personnel and restructuring reporting relationships, but our analysis revealed that the division's problems stemmed from a senior director who was systematically undermining team members in ways that were subtle enough to avoid HR attention but destructive enough to cripple productivity and innovation. The director in question reminded me strongly of Derek, employing similar tactics of public criticism, credit appropriation, and strategic exclusion from important decisions and opportunities. Like Derek, he'd built his reputation by taking ownership of other people's achievements while ensuring that his team members never gained enough confidence or visibility to challenge his authority. The pattern was so familiar that addressing it felt like conducting an exorcism of my own professional past. Our intervention required both immediate tactical changes and long-term cultural transformation. We implemented new project management systems that created clear documentation of individual contributions, established direct communication channels between team members and senior leadership, and developed performance metrics that were based on objective outcomes rather than subjective assessments from managers who had conflicts of interest. The results were immediate and remarkable. Within 90 days, the division's productivity had increased by 60%, employee satisfaction scores had doubled, and they'd launched 3 innovative campaigns that generated more client interest than the previous year's entire portfolio. The toxic director, faced with the loss of his ability to control and manipulate information flow, resigned within 6 months and was replaced by one of the team members he'd previously been suppressing. The success of this engagement established our reputation as specialists in toxic leadership remediation, and we began receiving requests from organizations across multiple industries who were dealing with similar challenges. Each project reinforced our understanding that the Derek phenomenon was far more widespread than most people realized, and that the economic and human costs of tolerating toxic management were enormous. The financial success of our consulting practice was gratifying, but the personal satisfaction came from witnessing the transformations that occurred when capable people were finally given environments where their talents could flourish. We'd helped hundreds of professionals discover abilities they didn't know they possessed and achieve career advancement that had seemed impossible under their previous circumstances. One particularly memorable case involved a brilliant data analyst at a pharmaceutical company who'd been relegated to routine reporting tasks because her manager felt threatened by her advanced statistical skills and strategic insights. She'd been told repeatedly that she lacked the communication abilities and leadership potential necessary for advancement despite having developed predictive models that could have saved the company millions of dollars in research and development costs. Our assessment revealed that her supposed communication deficiencies were actually the result of being consistently interrupted, dismissed, and excluded from meetings where her expertise would have been most valuable. When we created opportunities for her to present her work directly to senior leadership without interference from her toxic manager, her capabilities became immediately apparent. She was promoted to Director of Strategic Analytics within a year and eventually became one of the youngest vice presidents in the company's history. Stories like these were the real measure of our impact, far more meaningful than revenue figures or industry recognition. Each professional we helped escape toxic situations represented not just an individual success but a ripple effect of positive change that would influence their future colleagues, team members, and organizational cultures. The speaking opportunities that grew out of our consulting work were creating platforms for addressing systemic issues that affected millions of workers but received limited attention in traditional business education and leadership development programs. I was invited to deliver keynote presentations at major conferences, participate in academic research projects, and contribute to policy discussions about workplace culture and management effectiveness. One of my most impactful presentations was delivered at the National Leadership Summit, where I addressed an audience of senior executives and HR professionals about the hidden costs of toxic management. The data we'd compiled from our consulting engagements painted a stark picture of how destructive leadership styles were limiting organizational performance and creating competitive disadvantages that most companies didn't recognize or acknowledge. The presentation included case studies showing that organizations with toxic managers experienced 25% higher turnover rates, 30% lower innovation metrics, and 40% more customer satisfaction problems compared to companies with healthy leadership cultures. The financial implications were staggering, with some organizations losing millions of dollars annually due to the ripple effects of poor management that they attributed to other causes. The audience response was extraordinary, with many executives acknowledging that they'd observed similar patterns in their own organizations but had never connected the dots between individual manager behavior and broader business outcomes. Several companies engaged our services immediately following the presentation, and we began developing enterprise-level interventions that could address toxic leadership patterns at scale. The research component of our work was becoming increasingly important as we gathered data that could influence academic understanding and policy development related to workplace culture and management effectiveness. We'd partnered with several universities to conduct longitudinal studies tracking the career trajectories of professionals who'd experienced toxic management, and the results were providing compelling evidence for the need for more sophisticated approaches to leadership development and performance evaluation. Our findings were being published in peer-reviewed journals and cited in policy papers that were influencing legislation related to workplace harassment and discrimination. The work was contributing to a growing recognition that toxic management represented not just an individual problem but a systemic issue that required institutional solutions and cultural transformation. Meanwhile, my relationship with Apex Digital Solutions had evolved into something unprecedented in the agency world. The partnership between my consulting practice and the agency had been so successful that other marketing firms were implementing similar models, recognizing that traditional employment structures weren't flexible enough to retain top talent in an increasingly competitive marketplace. Rachel Kim had been promoted to regional director based largely on the success of our department's transformation and the innovative partnership arrangements she'd pioneered. She'd become a sought-after speaker on topics related to leadership effectiveness and organizational innovation, and her approach to talent development was being studied by business schools and management consultants. The contrast between Rachel's ascending career trajectory and Derek's continued struggles was a powerful illustration of how leadership approaches ultimately determine professional success. While Rachel was building her reputation through empowering others and creating environments where talent could flourish, Derek was still struggling to find positions that matched his inflated self-assessment and unrealistic salary expectations. Derek's post-Apex career had been a series of short-term positions that ended in mutual dissatisfaction, with each failure reinforcing his belief that external factors were responsible for his professional struggles. He'd never developed the self-awareness necessary to recognize his own contribution to these conflicts, and his inability to adapt his approach or acknowledge his limitations was making it increasingly difficult for him to find suitable employment. The final chapter of Derek's story came when he attempted to start his own consulting business, positioning himself as a marketing strategy expert despite having no track record of independent success or client satisfaction. The venture failed within 18 months, unable to attract or retain clients who quickly recognized the gap between his promised expertise and his actual capabilities. His failure was particularly poignant because it occurred simultaneously with my consulting practice reaching new heights of success and recognition. While Derek was struggling to convince even small businesses to hire him for basic marketing tasks, I was working with Fortune 500 companies and speaking at international conferences about advanced strategic approaches and organizational transformation. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it wasn't a source of satisfaction either. Derek's downfall was the inevitable result of his own choices and behavior, not something I'd wished upon him or actively worked to achieve. His struggles were a cautionary tale about the consequences of building a career on other people's achievements rather than developing genuine capabilities and ethical leadership practices. The real triumph wasn't in Derek's failure but in the success of everyone who'd been liberated from his toxic influence. The team members who'd worked under Derek at Apex had all flourished after his departure, with several receiving promotions and industry recognition that had been impossible while he was suppressing their contributions and undermining their confidence. Lisa Rodriguez had become one of the most sought-after creative directors in the Southwest, with campaigns she developed winning multiple industry awards and generating case studies that were featured in marketing textbooks. The confidence and strategic thinking that Derek had systematically suppressed were now recognized as exceptional talents that were influencing industry trends and establishing new standards for integrated creative campaigns. Michael Chen from our former team had launched his own successful digital agency, drawing on skills and insights he'd developed during the years when Derek was taking credit for his contributions. His client roster included several Fortune 500 companies, and his innovative approaches to data-driven marketing were generating results that exceeded traditional benchmarks by significant margins. Even the quieter team members who'd seemed content to remain in supporting roles during Derek's tenure had discovered leadership abilities and strategic insights that surprised everyone, including themselves. The environment of fear and suppression that Derek had created had prevented not just individual growth but collaborative innovation that emerged when people felt safe to contribute their best thinking and take calculated risks. The transformation of our former department became a case study that business schools used to illustrate the impact of leadership styles on organizational performance and individual development. The dramatic improvements in every measurable metric following Derek's departure provided compelling evidence for the economic value of healthy management practices and the hidden costs of tolerating toxic leadership. Our consulting practice began receiving requests from academic institutions who wanted to develop curricula based on our research and intervention strategies. We created executive education programs that taught senior leaders how to identify and address toxic management patterns before they could cause significant damage to organizational culture and performance. The educational component of our work was particularly meaningful because it represented an opportunity to prevent the kind of damage that Derek had inflicted rather than just remedying it after the fact. By training current and future leaders to recognize early warning signs of toxic behavior and implement structural safeguards against its development, we could potentially save thousands of professionals from experiencing the systematic undermining and suppression that I'd endured. The ripple effects of our work were extending beyond individual organizations into broader cultural conversations about workplace dynamics and professional development. Media outlets were featuring stories about toxic management and its impact on career advancement, with particular attention to how these patterns disproportionately affected women and minorities who were already facing additional barriers to professional success. The visibility of these issues was creating accountability pressures that were forcing organizations to take toxic leadership more seriously and implement more sophisticated approaches to management evaluation and development.
Companies were beginning to recognize that tolerating destructive managers represented not just an ethical problem but a competitive disadvantage that could significantly impact their ability to attract and retain top talent. My personal journey from Derek's target to industry leader had become a symbol of resilience and empowerment that was inspiring other professionals to recognize their own worth and resist attempts to diminish their capabilities and potential. The speaking engagements and media interviews I was doing included specific strategies and resources that people could use to document their contributions, build external validation networks, and develop the financial and emotional resources necessary to escape toxic situations. The mentoring work I was doing with individual professionals was perhaps the most rewarding aspect of my transformed career. Each person who found the courage to stand up for their professional value and refuse to accept limiting assessments of their potential was contributing to cultural changes that would benefit future generations of workers. One particularly impactful mentoring relationship involved a young marketing coordinator at a tech startup who was experiencing systematic undermining from her supervisor that reminded me strongly of my early experiences with Derek. She was brilliant and innovative but had begun to internalize the criticism and doubt her own capabilities just as I had during the worst periods of Derek's management. Working with her required not just strategic advice about career development but emotional support and confidence rebuilding that addressed the psychological damage that toxic management inevitably creates. We developed a comprehensive plan that included documenting her contributions, building external professional relationships, and creating alternative sources of validation and feedback that weren't filtered through her toxic supervisor. The transformation was remarkable. Within a year, she'd built a portfolio of freelance clients, gained recognition for innovative campaigns that her supervisor had previously claimed credit for, and eventually started her own successful marketing agency. Her success story became another example of how capable people could flourish when given environments that recognized and nurtured their talents rather than suppressing them. The financial independence that my consulting practice had provided was meaningful not just for personal security but for the freedom it gave me to choose projects and clients based on their potential for positive impact rather than just revenue generation. I was able to take on pro bono work with nonprofit organizations and social enterprises that were addressing important causes but couldn't afford premium consulting rates. This philanthropic component of our practice was creating additional opportunities to demonstrate that business success and social responsibility weren't mutually exclusive. The campaigns we developed for environmental organizations, educational initiatives, and social justice causes were generating impressive results, while also building our reputation as consultants who understood the importance of purpose-driven marketing and authentic stakeholder engagement. The long-term perspective that success had provided was helping me understand that my experience with Derek, while personally difficult, had ultimately been transformative in ways that shaped not just my career but my understanding of leadership, resilience, and the responsibility that comes with professional influence. The challenges I'd faced had developed capabilities and insights that were now benefiting hundreds of other professionals and dozens of organizations. The speaking engagements that had grown out of my consulting work were creating platforms for addressing systemic issues that extended far beyond individual toxic managers to include organizational cultures, institutional practices, and societal expectations that enabled and perpetuated destructive leadership patterns. The conversations I was participating in were contributing to broader cultural shifts toward more accountable and empowering approaches to professional development and career advancement. 10 years after Derek first called me worthless in that conference room, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the Global Leadership Excellence Conference, speaking to an audience of senior executives from around the world about the economic and human costs of toxic management and the competitive advantages that organizations could gain by implementing more sophisticated approaches to talent development and performance evaluation. The presentation drew from a decade of research and intervention work that had generated compelling evidence about the relationship between leadership quality and organizational performance. The data we'd compiled showed that companies with healthy management cultures consistently outperformed their competitors across multiple metrics, including profitability, innovation, customer satisfaction, and employee retention. The audience response was extraordinary, with many executives acknowledging that they'd never fully understood the connection between individual manager behavior and broader business outcomes. Several Fortune 500 companies engaged our services immediately following the presentation, and we began developing enterprise-level interventions that could address toxic leadership patterns at unprecedented scale. The recognition I received following that keynote presentation included invitations to join corporate boards, participate in policy development initiatives, and contribute to academic research projects that were influencing the next generation of business leaders and management practices. The platform that had grown from my experience with Derek was now providing opportunities to influence systemic changes that could prevent thousands of other professionals from experiencing similar suppression and undermining. The full circle nature of this transformation wasn't lost on me. The person who Derek had tried to convince was worthless and unsuited for strategic work was now being recognized as a thought leader whose insights were influencing management practices and organizational cultures around the world. The capabilities he'd dismissed as inadequate were now generating results and recognition that exceeded anything he'd achieved during his own career. But the most satisfying aspect of this journey wasn't the external recognition or financial success. It was the knowledge that my experience with Derek, rather than breaking me or limiting my potential, had ultimately provided the foundation for work that was making meaningful differences in other people's lives and careers. The pain he'd caused had been transformed into purpose, and the limitations he'd tried to impose had become the motivation for unlimited growth and contribution. The legacy of my transformation extended beyond personal success to include systemic changes that were benefiting entire industries and professional communities. The research we'd conducted, the interventions we'd developed, and the awareness we'd raised about toxic management were contributing to cultural shifts that would make it harder for future Dereks to damage careers and suppress talent. Derek himself had become a cautionary tale whose story was included in case studies and training programs that taught current and future leaders about the consequences of destructive management practices. His downfall wasn't something I'd sought or celebrated, but it served as a powerful illustration of how toxic leadership ultimately destroys not just other people's careers but the perpetrator's credibility and professional prospects as well. The person who'd once called me worthless in front of our entire team had become professionally worthless himself, not through any action I'd taken but through the natural consequences of his own choices and behavior. Meanwhile, the career he'd tried to destroy had become the foundation for influence and impact that extended far beyond anything either of us could have imagined during those difficult days at Apex. Sometimes the people who try hardest to convince you that you're worthless are really just revealing their own deepest fears about their inadequacy and irrelevance. Derek's attempts to diminish me were ultimately projection of his own insecurities and limitations, and his downfall was the inevitable result of trying to build success on a foundation of other people's suppressed potential rather than his own genuine capabilities. The empire I'd built from the ashes of his destructive management wasn't just about professional achievement or financial success. It was about the fundamental recognition that every person deserves to work in an environment that recognizes and nurtures their potential rather than suppressing it out of fear or inadequacy. Derek had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation to prove that his assessment of my worth was not just wrong but spectacularly irrelevant to what I could actually achieve when given the opportunity to demonstrate my true capabilities. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.